Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think this is the last one, so we won't spend too much of your time. We're going to talk very briefly about Black Sea pulses. As you can see from the photograph, the predominant pulses in the Black Sea are yellow peas, chickpeas, and to a lesser extent lentils. Black Sea pulse production has become interesting in the last 10 years because it is relatively low cost. Farmers expend something between 200 and 300 tons per hectare to grow a crop of peas. Yellow peas are slightly cheaper than chickpeas, and when you compare that to more like $400 or $500 for wheat and maybe $700, $800 for rapeseeds, with the exception of sunseeds, which are probably a similar price, it is probably the lowest cost plant to grow in the Black Sea area. It has a good rotational value because it's a nitrogen fixation, and in general the Black Sea farmers do have a limited number of options because we're talking about relatively dry land farming, especially southern Ukraine and southern Russia. The normal yields we see for good farmers is between 2 and 2.5 tons a hectare. That means that the crop cost for yellow peas in the Black Sea is between $100 and $120 a ton. So they are a relatively efficient and effective producer of peas. However, as we all know, it's extremely weather sensitive, and rather ironically, you would not believe, but the highest rainfall month statistically in the Black Sea is July. So there is very often issues of water damage, rain damage, and bleaching of pea products. And in addition to that, there was a very big learning process from the farmers who had not really produced this at all until 5-7 years ago. And so they had to learn a lot about handling, storage. There is a local bug which they have to deal with, so that the handling and storage has been fairly complicated, and we regularly had problems of people who were failing to protect the peas from high volume handling and large falls of distance from vessel elevator spouts into vessel bottoms, etc. So we have had issues of handling of goods. And now, ever since late 2017, prices have been very disappointing. And with this completely slowing down of any real volume business into the Indian subcontinent, farmers have been very, very disappointed with the prices they've been getting. And even though they're getting an ex-work cost of, let's say, $110 a ton, the actual maximum price they're receiving is probably no better than 140, 150 at the low point in the cycle. And in general, farmers the world over, with the possible exception of India and Africa, but farmers definitely in Europe, in Russia and Ukraine, in North and South America, have become what we call global farmers. They're relatively well off. In fact, a lot of them are very rich. They've invested a lot in storage. They've invested a lot in technology. And so they are a very strong holder. And so as we'll just briefly look at, for example, in Russia today, you would think that there is probably 250,000 to 300,000 tons of yellow peas that would be for sale. And here we are when they're about to plant the next crop and they still haven't been marketed. In addition, we're seeing that because of these relatively low prices, there is quite a lot of use of yellow peas specifically in the local feed markets. The meat markets in Russia and Ukraine are growing fast, both for domestic consumption and export. And so now we're seeing that if the prices are too low, especially relative to wheat, the farmer is selling it domestically into the animal feed market. And we see the result of this disappointing prices after the big rally in pulses prices in 2017. We got the record output of Russia at 3.3 million tons, but ever since then that's going down, and we are fairly confident that next year it will go down again, possibly between 10 and 20%. Ukraine, you see exactly the same trend. They're very much price sensitive, and so as soon as the prices start eroding, the volumes planted are going down. And here again we see the big swing in the movement of yellow peas. We had both countries shipping large volumes to India, and either directly or through Turkey, because don't forget, at least I would say 30 to 40% of anything that moves into the Indian subcontinent is transshipped through Turkey to go into boxes. And both the origins in 1718 were shipping large volumes to India. And if we now look to where it's changed, the big move is back into the EU destinations, which is again a feed consumer. This is going into animal feeding in Italy and Spain in significant volumes. So in general, the farmer is hoping for at least $170 ex-farm, which means $205 FOB, and that we will see what that means into India, which means it'll probably be very difficult. He has another dilemma, is that he actually thinks that peas should be priced at about $40 over wheat. Now that is a historical relationship which a lot of people look at in the feed industry, where they take four prices of wheat and one price of soy meal and get a value of peas. So he is actually getting or hoping to get a much, much higher price for his product, because as you know today, wheat prices have been relatively strong, even though they've faded in the last couple of weeks, but they're still $190 a ton FOB, which means he was technically hoping to get $250 FOB Black Sea. We are seeing this lack of Indian demand in the late 2017, where it collapsed, and that is meaning that there is a switch into feed, and we're even finding new markets for feed peas specifically in Europe, and even we're starting to see interest into Asia. And the other dilemma is, of course, we're now coming into the South American soybean crop, very large availabilities, every reason to believe that that and potentially corn prices will be unchanged to slightly weaker in the coming months, so even the feed demand will be probably a little bit disappointing. So again, I think we will see pressure on the feed, on the yellow pea prices in the Black Sea against the other competing feeds. We won't spend a lot of time on the balance here. The thing to notice on this yellow pea balance sheet is that the domestic market in Russia, both for feed and for domestic use as a food, is roughly 2 million tons. So of the crop, we actually use two-thirds of it domestically. But that variation of exports, which we've had between 17-18, when we had 1.3 million tons, down to this year where we're probably going to only get 600,000, is the kind of safety valve. And if that continues to be disappointing, we will see lower production. Ukraine is a similar sort of story. Domestic use is smaller population, less animals, and so they also will probably produce less, going from roughly 900,000 tons of exports in 17-18 to 500,000 tons. The chickpea balance is a slightly minor crop. It comes out of Russia alone. It's these relatively small kabulis. Again, a very big challenge with the Russian weather, but nevertheless, we do see 300,000 tons coming out most years. The dilemma for them is still the prices are relatively low, and the yields are much lower than any other crop. As you see from the line just above, we're about between 1 and 1.2 thousand tons, sorry, 1.1 and 1.2 tons per hectare. And at the moment, again, with India slowly disappearing, we have 40% of the oil exports go to Turkey, 20% to Pakistan, and then with India at 15%, the rest goes to Jordan and Saudi almost exclusively. The lentil balance sheet is, again, more just to look at the production. 250,000 tons coming out of Russia. We did have 250,000 tons coming out of Kazakhstan. The quality is extremely variable. A lot of it is very poor, and we've had a range of issues in actually placing a lot of this material. There is actually, of late, a little bit of movement actually from Kazakhstan into China. That flow for all products is increasing, whether it's oilseeds, wheat, etc. We're seeing land transfer of material out of Kazakhstan into China. But overall, the lentils are still faced with the big challenge of the quality they provide. We've even seen regularly samples of mixes of green and red lentils in the same sample, etc. So it is a very immature market for the moment. The market drivers today for Black Sea pulses and what we're going to see for the next year is the planting decisions, which are going to come up in the next month and a half, 2 months. They're not happy with the prices. I think there's a reasonable chance that we see a reduction of at least 10 to 20% of the surface area. The weather is a perennial problem. The winter has been very mild. It doesn't seem like there will be an issue going into planting, but as I said, ironically, the rain patterns in southern Russia and Ukraine are a little bit against normal, what you would expect. India, we can always say it's a question, but I think from what we've heard here, it's not going to be part of the equation for the next year or so. So I think anybody who does scale back his plantings is probably going to be justified. We've mentioned feed use. There is quite a significant switch into it at the right price, but we're at prices already where farmers are unhappy. So I think if there was to be a lowering of feed prices in competing prices in Europe, then there will be more pressure on the feed prices. And I repeat that what we said is there's probably 300,000 to 400,000 tons of yellow peas sitting in Russia, to a very lesser extent Ukraine, that are going to have to find a home in the next 3 months. China is a possibility. We all know that there was a letter of intent signed. China has been buying significant quantities of yellow peas out of Canada. They have started to ship corn out of Ukraine. There is various issues that they will have to get through, and so they could well be an eventual buyer for Ukrainian, and I say only Ukrainian because these are the only guys who've made any progress on the phytosanitary issue, which China absolutely insists on. As I've mentioned, this is the remaining stocks in Russia. It could be 300,000, maybe 400,000 tons, and to be very blunt, it looks like right now the farmers are going to lose this fight. They're going to keep holding until they absolutely have to sell for either storage, cash flow, or any other reason. And I'm sorry to say, I think it will be at slightly lower prices than where we are today. And the final summary, yeah, 2020, we're going to probably see lower production because the feed grains and soybean meal outlook is poor, big crops, relatively low prices. And obviously we now have this topic of conversation which is on everybody's lips, which is the coronavirus, which, as you probably know, will have some, already it will have suppressed quite a lot of demand, and the global outlook will be affected. But in the last time we had the SARS outbreak, wheat prices went down by about 20% in the 3 or 4 months after the crisis. So it's probably odds on that prices will be lower coming on grains and oilseeds coming into the next couple of months. So I think sadly we will see smaller production out of Russia and the Ukraine. And that's it. Thank you.